Hello, welcome to the Acquivore podcast. This is Don Mansfield. I'm your host, along with Jennifer Townsend and Nick Sanders. Tonight we're going to talk about a recent DoD IG Audit Report about awards, OT awards to consortiums. Before we get started, I just wanted to introduce my company, Don Acquisition. We're a federal acquisition training company, and the two courses, our premier courses right now, are the SAP course, Simplified Acquisition Procedures, and the DFARS course. We also provide a custom training if that's what you're interested in. So look into us, give us a call. The website's up on your screen. And let me turn it over to Jennifer, who's going to tell you about contracting courses.
Hi, I am Jennifer Townsend, and happy Cinco de Mayo. We're filming this on Cinco de Mayo. And I am the owner-operator of Contracting Courses. I there's my bios at the site, so you can check it out, and worked for the government for many years, and then decided that really at the end of the day, I was tired of being the boss, because you can't be the friendly person that everyone likes when you're the boss. And so since I wanted everyone to like me, I was like, oh, I'll just be the nice training lady. So I quit my job and am writing some courses so I can train and help people in their careers by sharing my voluminous knowledge that I gained over 20 years. My two main classes are clauses and provisions and commercial contracting. And hopefully I'll have a few more classes coming soon, but you can read all about it and check it out at contractingcourses.com.
All right. And Nick.
Hi
Nick, we
there.
can't see tonight, but he is there.
I am here. Happy Cinco de Mayo. I run Apogee Consulting Incorporated, as you can see. Thanks for showing that. www.apogeeconsulting.biz.com was taken. Apogee has been around for about 11, 12 years now, and we do all sorts of consulting in the government contracting realm. I right now just finished supporting a termination settlement proposal for a fairly large subcontractor in the defense space. I'm working with a small business on a commerciality package to assert commerciality, and I will be starting a cost accounting standards gap analysis project sometime soon, perhaps. So basically, if it's administrative and in the government contracting space, I like to help companies out with that. Thanks, Don.
All right. Thank you, Nick. Okay, so I mentioned before about this new audit that came out by DoD, and they're looking into other transaction awards awarded through consortiums. So we've all read this, and just maybe to give people a little bit of background on this, these types of OTs, an OT can be awarded directly to somebody, or it can be awarded through a consortium, and then the consortium finds someone within that consortium to do the work. That's kind of basically how they work. OTs have been around a long time, but they just have become a lot more popular recently. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that some of the traditional rules that are in the FAR don't apply. And that's kind of the attraction. So now we're starting to get some oversight reports of what's going on with OTs. This is probably not going to be the first. We'll probably have something from GAO. And they found a bunch of stuff. So I'm on the results page in brief. So they said they looked at 13 base OT awards valued at $24.6 billion. And contracting personnel did not properly track OTs awarded through consortiums and did not have an accurate count of OTs and associated dollar values because the Federal Procurement Data System Next Generation was not set up to track consortium OTs or individual consortium projects, and there was no guidance on how to award the projects to a consortium. They did not consistently award OTs in accordance with applicable laws and regulations, because there is little guidance or training on awarding consortium OTs, or have a consistent basis to negotiate CMO fees, because there was no guidance in place for establishing these fees. So the theme here is the IG wants guidance. So what do you guys, what was your reaction to this report?
Jennifer, you want to go?
Yeah, I was unmuting myself. I had a number of reactions. First, I mean, I was looking at this even before you had suggested discussing it, because this is obviously the procedures that were used to award the vaccine research contracts. Is they did some kind of consortium, you know, and then the consortium then re-awarded to whoever, you know, Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson and Johnson, et cetera. But I think the number one thing that was very interesting to me is they really had trouble even determining the universe of other transactions that were awarded in this fashion, which was similar to the criticism that we had seen on the vaccine contracts or other transactions, because there is a requirement to report them to FPDS-NG. The problem is FPDS-NG doesn't really have fields to report it in a way that facilitates the reporting, particularly when it's awarded to a consortium, and then the consortium does a number of subawards to, you know, who knows how many. And so when they went to do this audit, they struggled to identify even the quantity of other transactions that fell into, I mean, A, that had been awarded in the first place, and then B, that fell into this category of consortiums. And then they relied on some kind of self reporting tracking mechanism from the services, which they pointed out had a number of some issues. So I think that's the first issue that I have, is that and I mean, I agree, it's an issue that the report took, but these aren't very transparent. I mean, as far as like reporting like the grants and cooperative agreements generally are at least reported on grants.gov or announced there, whereas these aren't even necessarily announced, you know, for competition in, you know, because the rules are different, and it's not quite clear exactly what the rules are, and so everybody seems to be making up their own rules. So I'll start with those as my initial remarks, but yeah, there's definitely, you know, competition is definitely an issue, which that's always been an issue in my mind under other transactions. I mean, people were so anxious to rush to grants and cooperative agreements and other transactions, you know, back in the day. But this authority, the 2371B, that's been around for quite some time, actually. And, you know, I remember citing that, you know, well before 2018. But the concern with it is there's not a FAR Part 6. You know, in contracting, there is a FAR Part 6 for sole source contracting that spells out, you know, exactly, I shouldn't say sole source, but for limiting competition. Whereas 2371B, basically, I think it's merit-based competitive procedures, period. There's not like well, here's how to go sole source or whatever. Though I assume if you were going to go sole source, you would at least justify it. But clearly that's not happening. So I could go on, but I'll stop there.
Yeah. Nick?
Well, yeah, I thought this was a fascinating report. I learned a lot, right? I was first sort of sensitized to this when Jennifer brought it up a couple weeks ago, talking about Operation Warp Speed. But I did some research over on MITRE.org. There's a pretty good summary of how these things worked. And I was fascinated by the relationship here. So there's a consortium with a consortium managing organization or entity, right? Which I think they call the CMO in this audit report, right? So the CMO creates a consortium. And then the government says, okay, I have a need. I'm going to go to the consortium. So according to this report, they then award an OT to the consortium managing organization, or CMO. And then they say, in your consortium, we want to use that vendor, for lack of a better word, and they award another OT to the CMO just to go to that particular vendor. That's how I understood this. And I was fascinated by who's the prime, who's the sub, where's the privity of contract here? How does this all work? So I went to the MITRE site, and there's a listing of, I believe, roughly 20 consortiums, and each one seems to be tied to a federal agency, department, or component, right? Like there's several for the Army, there's several for the Air Force, etc. And these CMOs got a great deal. To join their consortium, you got to pay. It's a pay to play, right? Just to start with. Some of these people, it's $100 or $500. For some people to join some consortia, it's $5,000. And one of these consortiums has 700 members. So let's say it's $1,000 a member times 700. That ain't bad. And then, in addition, the CMO gets its own profit piece associated with managing the OT that's awarded to the consortium member. And that profit, per this report, ranges from 1.5% of cost to 6% of cost, right? And there's no rules, there's no structured approach to evaluating profit reasonableness. It's negotiated. So these CMOs are getting paid by the people to join the consortium, and then they're getting paid by the government to manage the OT that's apparently going to a directed OT that's going to one member, or it could be multiple members, but the government is picking. So who's the prime here? Who's the sub? I honestly couldn't figure it out. And I was fascinated by this. I want to be a CMO. Those guys are getting paid from both ends. Mm-hmm. Anyway, over.
Well, I think, the lack of reporting, yeah, that's a problem. I mean, it's by law, they were supposed to be reporting, and it wasn't done because they didn't get FPDS program to do any kind of OT reporting. So the IG is right there. But I'm starting to see it seems to me like the IG wants competition by contest. Like they kind of, not the like contests we're talking about in government, but they want to have what they think competition is everyone submits a proposal for a specific thing, and then the government evaluates that proposal and makes an award. And that didn't happen there's this one part where the Marine Corps, they looked at 13 different consortium OTs. And then they decided from the 13 they looked at which one best suited their needs. And then they awarded to that one. Okay? Now the IG says that's not competitive, says that's sole source. I don't think so. I think if you're looking at it through the lens of FAR Part 6, then okay, then it's other than full and open competition. But I think when you're using an OT, you're supposed to be adapting to the market you're buying from, similar to when you're buying commercial items. And I don't think it's typical in these markets to have these competitions by contest. Everyone submits a proposal in, and then then the government does some kind of evaluation and makes an award. I think, like I remember, I once spoke to you about this, Nick. I was like, well, Nick works for a major defense contractor, and I said, how do you go about buying things commercially? And the process you explained to me was, well, we do a lot more market research than is done in the government. It's just months and months of market research. You might meet with a few sources, and then you make a decision, and you make an award. Um, Now, I don't consider that to be non-competitive. I think if you're looking into a competitive market and you're considering what's out there, that's enough. Just like uh, ordering under a GSA schedule, if it's under the simplified acquisition threshold, you just have to consider at least three sources. You don't necessarily have to solicit quotes or solicit proposals. So I think the knock on that the DoD IG made on the Navy, I don't think that's justified.
Yeah, but Don, I'm sorry, I want to break in on this. These
Yeah.
consortiums are unique unto themselves. One
Okay.
consortium doesn't do the same thing that any other consortium does. I wish I could give you that link to that MITRE thing that lists all these consortia. They're all unique. They all have a different specialty. They all have their own pools of members, right? And so
Okay.
looking at 13 is like, okay, I looked at a bicycle, I looked at a motorcycle, I looked at a car, and I looked at a spaceship, and I chose the car was best for my needs. I'm sorry, I'm buying it. These are unique entities. Each one is unique. And also, I want to add, just to jump in before Jennifer does, I know she wants to say something. The fact that the government chooses one consortium member out of potentially 700, if that isn't sole source, I don't know what would be.
Okay,
Go
but
ahead, Jen.
what if you're considering the others before you choose that one? Why is that? What's the problem?
Why did you pick
Well,
one?
I think we're going back to what my problem was even way back in the day when I was doing these myself, is well, and I think this is one of the fundamental criticisms of government contracting, or fundamental, people who like it, is this idea of competition. Like, the reason competition is, or government contracting in general, is so different is because you have to say up front how you're going to select the source before you select it. And, I think that's what's very, that's why source selection in the government is, you can have whole classes on it, and, decades of, people arguing about it, because, what if you forget something or whatever? And that, in theory, that's what market research is for, is to inform crafting a source selection procedure that will be, fair, and allow other people to come into the market, maybe that don't exist now. And I think that would be my criticism of this is, market research, and many times, especially the last 10 years, I would get these, JNAs, or limited source justifications, that were essentially market research statements. They would say, well, we did this market research, and therefore this is the source we're going to. But saying that you've concluded that a source is the best source is not the same as allowing other sources to compete. And I think, for me, that was like the big issue in contracts. And I think a similar issue should exist in other transactions. I mean, the whole point of other transactions was to tap into people, non-traditional defense contractors. But I would be willing to bet that the bulk of these other transactions are, in fact, going to the traditional defense contractors. And it's allowing people to circumvent, the standard FAR approach to get to their favorite Bubba, or to the Bubba that's, promised them the best deal in the back door approach, or whatever. Whereas the goal of, like, saying, hey, this is what we're interested in, it allows for a consortium to form that maybe doesn't even exist right now, that could better meet that need than one that's in these existing consortia. And so I think that's where I have an issue with it, is, there is some merit to doing market research. I mean, there's a great deal of merit to doing market research, but is that really getting you the best cutting edge technology that's out there? I would say probably not. I mean, I think if you have like more of a, hey, this is what we're interested in, and there's, you know, potentially billions of dollars at play, then you're likely to get people interested or companies interested that don't even exist at this point in time. That would be my response to that.
What were you going to say, Nick?
No, I'm trying to find this MITRE thing, and I did actually find it. So there's a listing of all the consortiums that's current as of March 15th, 2021. It's at aida.miter.org/OTA/existing-OTA-consortia. So it lists all these things. And there's, you know, in some of these, there's hundreds of members, as I mentioned before. And definitely some are traditional defense contractors, right? They even list them in this thing. Who's a traditional, who's a non-traditional, who's a small business. And, you know, it's not clear to me who's getting the awards. I know Jennifer bet that they would go traditional. I don't know if that's true or not true. I couldn't see. But this whole thing, I mean, you know, guys, I'm willing to disagree with the DoD IG on almost any report they've ever issued, right? But in this case, I actually kind of think they're more right than wrong. There's just a whole lack of transparency. The contracting is unclear. What is the relationship between the consortium member who receives an award and the government when it goes through a CMO who's getting paid to, quote, manage something? What is the relationship between the consortium member who got the award and all the hundreds of consortium members who didn't get an award, who paid in the what are they paying for? You know, what are they doing? What are we doing? So I'm a little, I mean, I hate to say it, it goes against my grain, but I think this report is valuable. And I think they really need to address these issues.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I kind of think that this initiative to like do more and more OTs, I don't think it's going to end well. I think this is probably the tip of the iceberg. I think we're probably going to see some blatant abuse, and then we'll probably see a scale back on the use of OTs.
So
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm at the site,
No, so
and they break.
I just.
You see it?
Go ahead, Nick.
They break these
What's that?
Into OSD-sponsored consortia, Air Force-sponsored consortia, Army-sponsored consortia, Navy-sponsored consortia, and non-DoD-sponsored consortia. So they're grouping them. And these people, I'm telling you, they're super specialized, and they're all linked. Like, I'm just going to pick one almost at random, right? Let's go to the Army. What's up with the Army?
Can you share your screen?
I don't know. Can I?
Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing, and you're a host, so you should be able to share your screen.
Okay. Can you see it?
It's thinking. I'm going to make the window a little bigger.
This is very exciting.
Isn't it something new? I'm trying to share. I don't know what's going on or not going on.
Okay, but continue with what you were saying.
Okay, so I'm just picking one, Army-sponsored consortia. There's an Aviation and Missile Technology Consortium, sponsored by the Army Combat Capabilities Development Command, DEVCOM. There's a Cyberspace Operations Broad Responsive Agreement, Other Transaction Agreement Consortium, sponsored by the PEO of the Enterprise Information System, EIS. And I mean, those are just two, right? There's a Defense Automotive Technologies Consortium. There's, and so these guys are hyper focused, hyper unique. They don't have any duplication that I see between these two, between any of them, right? Looking at the non-DoD sponsor, there's a Border Security Technology Consortium. There's a National Geospatial Intelligence Agency System of Systems Consortium. Okay. But I'm just telling you, I don't think I'm good at it.
So doesn't that then justify sole sources?
What does justify sole source mean? You guys are the government people. Do you see what I'm seeing?
See,
Yeah.
I would say my answer to that would be no, because I think if you go back to and I think this is key to point out because not everyone is familiar with other transactions. And I'm sure a fair number of people will watch this because it's a sexy term right now is like, oh, let's use other transactions because then we don't have to use the FAR. But there are requirements to use other transactions. So if you're looking on page 2 of the report, to use another transaction for prototypes, you have to have at least meet these 4 conditions. And the first one is to have at least one non-traditional defense contractor or nonprofit research institution participating to a significant extent. And, I know from back in the day, people would say, oh, well, simply creating a consortia is participating to a significant extent. So, I think what I see happening is people, traditional defense contractors are running out there and trying to find someone to create a consortia with so then they can enter into this other transaction. And the big deal with a prototype is then they can move directly to production without further competition. And so in my mind, the thought behind the consortia was that people should be able to create consortia on an as needed basis instead of, have existing consortia that allow you to just like pick which consortia best meets your needs. Again, this is where I go back to, I think one of the more compelling examples of advancing state-of-the-art technology and really doing something spectacular was, and I'm sure you sat in on some of these briefings, Don, when the DARPA did the self-driving vehicles via contest. Do you remember that?
Vaguely, yeah.
Yeah, and so what they did is they announced it as a contest, and I heard the DARPA program manager of that particular contest. I can't remember the exact name of the program at this point in time, but I heard him, give the results of the first year of the contest, and not a single vehicle finished the course. And it was a pretty elaborate course. I mean, they had to cross fences and gullies and go over rocks and stuff. But what he was the most excited about was the non-traditional people that came to play because of the interest that the contest generated. And as a result of that, they advanced the state of the art technology substantially. And so sure enough, the acoustics, the people that came to propose on this contest, they did end up getting into partners with big defense contractors. And, the state of the technology is advanced now that self-driving vehicles are something that you can, practically, I mean, they come almost standard in cars these days as some degree of self-driving. But to me, the big lesson learned from that, and I think what DoD was trying to get at, is that these consortiums should be created once there's this need that is much more publicized, because then you're much more likely to actually advance the state of the art as opposed to just circumventing the rules. Because what I see here, and I think that's why they're going to probably get themselves into trouble, is like it's like there's this repeated desire certainly within DoD, if not the entire federal government, to find some new way to circumvent the FAR, if that makes sense. And so right
Yeah.
now, other transactions is the way that they're doing it. And so, the way that they're meeting, the way they're checking off that block one is by creating these consortia that exist in advance. And I think that what they're trying to claim is that these consortia are, a significant extent of participation. The report doesn't go into that, but I mean, I remember even, when I sat next to you, that was what people, well, simply creating a consortia is a significant extent. And in my mind, that's not true. I mean, you just do some terms of agreement and then suddenly you've participated to a significant extent. I don't, in my opinion, that doesn't cut it.
No,
Well,
I agree. I feel it's clearly a pay to play. But I'm not saying that like it's illegal pay to play. I'm saying that if you want to join the consortium and be a member, you got to pay. And what does that entitle you to? It entitles you to a chance that the government may be interested in you and want to give you an OT. A chance. It's a raffle.
it's kind of like a GSA schedule.
Yeah,
right?
and I don't know that that's necessarily the idea behind other transactions. It's not supposed to be like this, here's this, card deck of existing consortia. It's this, the idea, again, in my mind, for other transactions is like cutting edge research. And if you want that cutting edge research, then you need to kind of announce it. I mean, I like the DARPA approach. And in my mind, maybe here I am, I'm solving DoD's problems for them. They should create an other transaction website where they can put DARPA at any given time has like their broad agency announcements, where they're saying, here's technology that we're very interested in, and they can get these white papers that outline different approaches. And these white papers can come in from, all kinds of players, some traditional and some non-traditional. And in my mind, that's kind of what I would like to see for these other transactions. It shouldn't just be like, oh, here's this card deck of existing consortia, and you can just pick your consortia in advance and give them money, and then go into maybe full production down the line without any competition. When as we here I am being cynical, but that's when the prices get jacked up, to something potentially very unreasonable. But it should be like, oh, here's what we want to do. We want to have invisible radar, whatever it is, cargo container security. I'm thinking about some of the things that I've worked on R&D in the past, and people should be able to, the crazy Einstein sitting at home in his basement by himself should be able to go to that website and be like, I've always had this great idea for this, and be able to like team with somebody to do that instead of just going to your existing consortia. In my mind, there needs to be some kind of public way to announce this technology to make sure you're getting that cutting edge technology.
I'm not a lawyer,
but I feel like I need to caveat my own statement. Well, just before Nick says what he was going to say, I was just going to say, I feel like I do need to caveat my own statement. I mean, I know all the traditional defense contractors soak a lot of money into R&D. And so I'm sure that these existing consortia have, access to some degree of R&D. But as far as like this, actually cutting edge, let's take a new approach that's going to really advance the state of the art, I feel like some kind of announcement is going to be more effective, and allowing time for a new consortia to be formed that could really, do something spectacular is, in my opinion, something that should be occurring, certainly when you get into the $1 billion type of transaction.
So do you think that should be the law or that should be an option?
Well, in my mind, I think it is the law, but I think that's really the crux of the problem. And I think Nick was getting ready to start to say something like this when he said, I'm not a lawyer. The fact is merit-based competitive procedures is not clearly defined, and it's not clearly defined in the Dodgers, and it's not really clearly defined in the other transaction guide. And so you end up with people like, inventing their own merit-based competitive procedures. I mean, I'll confess, I did it. I had another transaction that my scientist had already picked who he wanted to go to, and he was. I mean, that technology was weird enough that I'm fairly certain there wasn't a lot of players. But in hindsight, if there would have been time and resources, I mean, it does take resources to compete, no doubt about it. But maybe there could have been some other players that could have responded and done just as good, if not better, than that particular case. But I think, to me, that's the crux of the problem. Is there is a law, and the law says merit-based competitive procedures, but what does that mean is the big issue.
But Jennifer, that's where I was going. That's where I was going because, again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to say I understand everything about the law. But there seems to be something actually anti-competitive or maybe antitrust about these consortium, in the sense that you can't get an OT unless you're a member of the consortia, right? Or the consortium. You have to join. You have to pay your $1,000 or $5,000 or $7,500 to join, and that entitles you to maybe get an OT. Whereas if you didn't join, hey, you're not getting an OT, and therefore you're actually maybe leaving people out who might be able to contribute, it seems to me. And now, I just want to add, I've seen real non-traditional innovation before in my career. I've experienced it. I was working with a large contractor who did environmental remediation at military bases. And they would set up these ground monitoring stations all over the base. Each one was several $100,000. And then they'd go from well to well monitoring the groundwater. I'm sure you guys are familiar with what I'm talking about. Well, some people quit and they formed their own company. You know what they came up with? Portable monitoring stations. You only need to have 2 or 3. And they put them on wheels, and they would wheel them, and they would do the testing, and they could do faster, better, and cheaper testing. Now that's innovation. That is significant, right? And so I know it happens. I know it can happen. I'm just not so sure this is the way to make it happen. I kind of like what you said earlier, Jennifer. How is this any better than a broad agency announcement? It's not. It doesn't strike me at all that it's any better. The main benefit of an OT is DCAA doesn't get in your face and worry about costs, as far as I can tell, right? You don't
Well,
have
and I think that's
showing
really
up and
the key.
questioning costs. That's it. Over to you.
Yeah, I just feel like the way it's being used primarily, and I'm going to say primarily because I'm sure there's a couple of OTs out there that, are purist in the sense that they're actually, using it the way it should be. But this appears to just be being used to circumvent the competitive process. And that's and not just the competitive process, but the competitive and auditing process, to large degree. Whereas, and this is where I just go back to the DARPA competition. I mean, to me, that was and especially hearing that program manager, I mean, I wish I had recorded it or whatever, although at the time you couldn't carry phones around the way you can now. But I mean, when he mentioned the non-traditional, I mean, he was amazed, and DARPA was amazed by the sources that came out of the woodwork to play in this contest, and those sources were truly non-traditional. I mean, I just remember him talking about it was like a father son who were, musicians, and they started talking about using acoustic feedback to, control a vehicle or whatever, and that was something that nobody had really thought about, too much at that point in time. And so, could that father and son form a consortia? With a large defense contractor, yes, but are they going to be able to pay a $5,000 fee and join one of these existing consortia? The answer is no. And so I think that's where I would be going with this is right now, it appears that with these existing consortia, it is just, let's keep the people who've already joined the club, here close to us, and then DoD can just go to whichever one they want. Kind of like basically kind of like the other ways we've circumvented competition by using GSA or by using these multiple award contracts, and this way you can get around all the other messy rules, small business, preferences, socioeconomic preferences or whatever, just as long as you have one of these non-traditional defense contractors, which again, I'm sure they're just using these consortia to check the block for that.
Well, let's say that that's true, that there is this resistance to competition, resistance to oversight of costs and things like that, and there's aversion by program managers to use traditional methods. Couldn't that be for a good reason? Like maybe what we have, the legal structure in place and the traditional methods are not meeting the mission. And, it's just not realistic to have a open competition for everything when we're at war with China right now. We're in a cyber war.
We're at war with China? What happened? I didn't get the memo.
It's a cyber war.
Or Russia. We're in a cyber war with ourselves, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah. All right. So, but see, Jennifer was right again when she talked about the father and son forming a consortium with a traditional prime. That already happens. It's called a teaming arrangement, right? That's already in the toolbox of what can happen and what should happen. A prime finds a small business or a non-traditional defense contractor who's got a brilliant idea. The prime's going to want to go with that to the prime's customer and get some business, right? It's going to happen. And to the other point, I think it's pretty much commonly accepted that the defense acquisition system, as it's currently constituted today, is broken. I don't think many people would argue. But the question is this OT process the right way to get around it? I don't know if you can fix it anymore, to be honest with you. But I mean, if we're doing all this just to get around competition, seems to me that somebody could come up with the sole source justification that solved that need, if that was the real need. There's always a sole source justification.
Yeah, and I would say I don't think that people wanting to circumvent competition is a sign that competition is a bad thing or should be done away with. I think that at the end, and I grew fond of saying this, and I still think this is true even more today than it was, last year and so on, is at the end of the day, every problem in the government becomes a procurement problem. So if everybody drops the ball, like if the post office drops the ball, or if the, CDC drops the ball or whatever, then they're like, okay, no problem, we'll buy a solution. So then they show up, and this happened particularly when I was overseas. People would show up in my office and be like, the Marines are landing in Greece tomorrow and we need a contract. And I'd be like, well, we can't support the Marines tomorrow, especially because tomorrow is Saturday and it's Friday. The contractors won't even be in the office to answer their phones. But because like whoever in the logistics arm was supposed to get the tents or the whatever it was there, like somehow the email got lost, or who knows what it was, but they would always be like, let's try, let's get contracts. And then they would be pressuring us to not compete. And they would have these fairly lame, like their sole source justification was like, well, everybody dropped the ball, so now we need to sole source it to a firm or whatever. And that is real life. I can't deny that. I mean, a soldier came in and worked on Saturday and got a contract awarded, and we had support to the Marines by Monday. So they had to kind of live on their own on that beach for 2 days or whatever. But and we did, we had to use the existing husbanding contract, and there was a number of things that happened. So with the tools in your toolbox, you can solve the problems, but I don't think circumventing, I will be the first to say circumventing competition is not a good thing. I witnessed it, ship repair, I'll just call that out. The way they had been doing ship repair there was clearly circumventing competition. And, when we drove competition into the mix, the cost of those repairs went down by at least 30%, 30 to 40%. The cost went down, and interestingly enough, the quality improved. And so competition there's a benefit to it. Is there a cost? Absolutely. But is, 30% savings and a higher standard of repair worth that, extra 60 days of announcing it and having a technical library that actually specifies the work that needs to be done? I would say yes.
So I think in response to this audit, you're going to get more guidance on competitions. So should it be something like FAR Part 6 where everybody gets an opportunity by default, or should competition be encouraged? And it's kind of the option that up to the program manager whether or not they want to have a competition where anyone can compete.
Let me
Well,
say
I
that
think you'll end up with something more like FAR 35, the broad agency announcement process.
I think you will, but let me say this, Don. Looking at these consortia, looking at 13 is not competition. It's not even market research, okay? They're all different. They're all unique. They have nothing in common with each other. None of them do. So if you want competition, it's got to be within the consortium. So this consortium has 700 members. Okay, then put out something to all the consortium members that says, here's our need. What can you do? Now that, A, is a tangible benefit for people paying their money to join a consortium, and B, actually creates competition between entities that have already declared this is a subject matter that they have expertise in. It's already been qualified. I think that would be fine.
Okay. Well, why would it be not okay if the government looked at the members of the consortium and based on the information they had made a decision who they wanted to go with? Why do they have to, what if they have enough information from just what's out there and what the consortium members share?
Well, then it would cost you nothing to do an announcement that said we intend to award this thing to this consortium member. However, you have 30 days. If you want to submit a proposal to compete with these people, we will accept it and review it. Not having received anything from 30 days, we're going to go ahead and make our award. At least you're
and I just keep
a fair opportunity at that point. Sorry, Jennifer.
Yeah, I don't know that it's not okay. I don't think it's a matter of like right versus wrong. I think for me, it's a question of like it's better to announce it and compete it, especially, and this is where I keep going back to, this is supposed to be cutting edge technology. It is not supposed to be like, mowing the lawn, or something like that. And I think that's where that and I guess that's what bothers me about this kind of stuff, is like the response to this is now going to be more guidance, and I guarantee you that more guidance is going to look more like the FAR, and then there's going to be more audits, and they're going to point out more flaws, and then we're going to end up with and basically the cutting edge, the ability to tap into that cutting edge technology the way that it's supposed to be tapped into is going to be lost as people continue to try and circumvent. To me, this is common sense type of stuff. If you want cutting edge technology, you really need to try your best to find that cutting edge technology by looking at your pre-existing suite of cutting edge technology. I mean, do we really know that that's all that's out there? Probably not. I mean, and that's where I go with Nick. It doesn't cost you anything to announce it and to see what's out there, and to allow for new consortiums. And this is where I go back to, like, a new consortium could form. It could be like, oh, this is something I've been passionate about, and I've got my friend Fred over here who's a university instructor or whatever, and let's team up and respond to this. And that might be what's needed more so than this existing consortium. And that, in my mind, it doesn't cost you anything other than some additional time to tap into that competition.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That there's a cost of time. But you brought up FAR Part 35. I think that is a good idea to kind of have like a broad agency announcement approach. And what's interesting is the guy who's like credited with coming up with the idea of OTs for DARPA was this guy Richard Dunn, and his argument is that all research should be done through OTs. It should not be done through procurement contracts. Like, a procurement contract is the wrong vehicle for research and development.
I don't know that I disagree with that. I mean, I certainly, having done a fair bit of research contracts, I felt that a lot of the FAR was too narrow for research. But I think that, again, you and I were fortunate to work in a place where the attorneys and the entire management structure was aware of that, and we could justify some of our because I really think the follow-on contracts to research were the tough ones, and that's what this is trying to get at, is like, when you research, it's like the DARPA approach. You throw a bunch of spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks, and that's what research is. And you can't necessarily craft like this, and I think this is where the traditional FAR approach is painful. You can't craft this clear statement of work in advance, because as you're doing research, what you thought was going to work ends up not working, but then something else starts to work and you want to spend your money doing that. And other transactions should allow for that. And I think the benefit of consortia is you can then pick up a new consortium member that allows you to go off on this tangent that's very promising. But again, to the extent that these are being used to just simply circumvent existing FAR procedures and to pursue standard weapons systems approaches without, the FAR inhibitions, it's just like every other effort made to circumvent FAR procedures, that door is going to slam shut. And it's going to be unfortunate, because I think there is a market for other transactions, as long as it's being used the way that it was supposed to be used, to really tap into that cutting edge research.
Well, to me, the issue is the consortia. The audit report doesn't have much to say about this is an oxymoron, the traditional OTs that are direct award to one contractor, right? Those are fine. Not a lot in this report about that. It's the ones that are going to the consortia that are, more than 3/4 of everything in this report are about those. And so if there's new policies and guidance, I think it ought to be focused on that aspect and not on the sole award for somebody to do an OT. And I also want to comment on Don's question. From time to time, I get phone calls from universities who are wrestling with research contracts that they've been awarded because it's square peg, round hole. And these contracts have a bunch of clauses in them, and cost accounting standards starts to show up, and they're really trying to comply, but it's really contorting their business approach or their higher education structure to comply. And so I kind of agree. This isn't the way to do it. You're wasting taxpayer money, and because you're causing these people to do things they wouldn't normally do to pursue research. Give them a grant, give them something else, and just let them go. Now, we know there's grant fraud, so you got to watch for that. But this notion that you're going to put all these clauses in there and they're going to have employee training on human trafficking, and they have to warn their employees not to do text messaging while they're driving. It just counter to what you want to accomplish, very much so in my mind. So I kind of agree with the comment, Don.
Well, and we didn't really talk too much about it, although it does go into it in the report. You know, like it mentions the security issues, but those security issues have been around in every type of defense contracting or research contracting that I've been aware of. Like, especially when you're talking about military technology. I mean, it was fascinating to me that when you're going to cutting edge R&D, I mean, can you go to a research university in the United States of America that doesn't have Chinese foreign nationals working in those labs? You know, the answer is probably not. And so when you have Chinese foreign nationals working on this stuff, of course they're going to have, I mean, they're the ones working on it. And so it's like they're not, or somehow you're going to control access to their own brain. I mean, it just doesn't work that way. And that's one of the problems that I think you're always going to have in R&D, not just in these other transactions, but you know, controlling this, you know, if they're creating military critical technology, you know, there's kind of this thought process that we should only, you know, only have U.S. citizens working on it. You know, I mean, it becomes very problematic, because that's not how R&D works at these universities and many of these, you know, labs as well.
So, do we think that there shouldn't be consortia, or CMOs?
No, I think there
I
should be.
think they need, Jennifer, I agree with you. I think there should be. Don, I think that the consortia could perform a valid service. That could be the basis of your market research. All the, 500 members in a consortium that all profess to have expertise in one thing, that sounds like really good market research to me. You know? And if you use them right, I feel there's a value added role, but they're not being
And their
used right.
dues
They're
are
being
their
used
dues are
to
current.
obscure.
Yeah, that's where
And their
the
dues are
pay to
current.
play I
The
have
other
an
thing is
issue with.
these CMOs, the entities that, yeah, the CMO role is nebulous in the extreme to me. Why are they getting a cut of profit? What are they managing? And why can't the government manage the OT agreement directly? Why is there a special AO intended to manage a consortium instead of, like a contracting officer? I'm very concerned that they're being abused, and I think we could stand to see a lot more policy with respect to the consortia.
Yeah, I think you're right. Um, but I guess when that policy is made, I just think there has to be an appreciation for it. People are doing this like they're evading competition, or trying to take the easy way out. I think they're doing it for a good reason. I think they really are trying to meet the mission.
That's so funny. That this is where
Um,
Don and I are totally different. Like Don is normally very cynical about, you know, like government people that, like, in my mind, they're not doing it for a good reason. They're doing it to just make their own lives easier.
It could be that. It could be that.
Support the mission is a really poor rationalization, Don. What you're saying effectively is the ends justify the means, and I'm not going to have it.
See, and I don't know that they're trying to support the mission. They're
No,
trying to support the
I'm
mission
not
in,
justifying their actions.
yeah, in a way that's not normal. And this is where, I guess this is where I go back to, I'm a spirit of the law, not just letter of the law type of a person. And in my mind, the spirit of this other transaction is, and the spirit, if you think about it, what are these consortia for? The consortia is, like, I think it's meant to be more fluid, to respond to the needs of developing research. It's not meant to be like, oh, let's form this, solid consortia that then exists and isn't fluid. Because again, to me, cutting edge technology is fluid. And that's the whole goal, is to be able to add people to the consortia in a responsive way, whereas adding a subcontractor to a contract is not really, that's a much more involved, elaborate process. Whereas as you start to, see research moving in this direction, you can, pick up a new consortia member. So to me, there's some real value to these consortia, but I just don't know that the bulk of these consortia are doing that. They're just kind of like, oh, let's pay our $5,000 entry fee, and then we might get a contract or another transaction out of it. So
yeah, and these consortia, each one is linked to a federal component, right? So let's say that you want to sell to National Geospatial Intelligence, right? You've got something really cool for them. You can't, because there's already a consortium that's linked to them. You got to join the existing union if you want to play. You can't go alone. So they're actually restricting competition, I think, in a very real way. It's my consortium or the highway, because I was there first and I'm already linked. See, they're my sponsor. When they have a need, they're going to go to me. They're not going to look anywhere else. That's not good.
I just want to be clear. I'm not trying to justify, like, evading the laws or anything. I just think there needs to be a sensitivity to that when you're making new policy.
Did you make that clarification on advice of counsel, Don?
What?
Jennifer got it. Sorry. Continue, Don.
Well, I guess being close to a program, like I have been for like the last 2 years, I've been more close to the program office than the contracting office. And I see the motivations to do things that are not by the rules, right? And it's not laziness that I see, and it's not just because I don't want to do that, or I think that rule is stupid. It's more like it's getting in the way of the bigger picture, like this thing we're trying to complete for the Navy, and that rule, that procedure, that policy is getting in the way. So it's not just self-serving reasons
I
or
agree with
self-serving
that.
motivations.
I agree with that. And I certainly, I think a lot of programs are in that boat, but at the same time, I think the policies almost, most of these policies do have exceptions for when it gets in the way. And I, and maybe this is where there's some other lazy bureaucrat or whatever term you want to use in the government, is like, rather than asking for an exception to the policy or finding a way to get it done, so, oh, well, you just can't do that. And there's a number of 1102s or contracting officers that's their approach. And so it just becomes easier to try and, oh, well, in that case, we'll just do another transaction. But yeah, I mean, but when you start using things to circumvent existing rules instead of to meet the intent of that guidance, then that door closes. And to me, that's where you just have to be careful. When enough people use other transactions to kind of get traditional things done, then pretty soon another transaction will look just like a FAR contract. And that
Yeah,
and that's
yeah,
and that would
I
not
think,
be good for anybody.
yeah. I think the policymakers just haven't caught up yet to OTs. That's what makes them attractive. Just wait till they
See,
catch up, and they'll be just like the FAR-based contracts.
Well, but
the
I mean, I don't want
policymakers
to
haven't
name.
caught up. DAU hasn't caught up on training. There's nothing out there that tells anybody what a reasonable CMO profit or fee rate ought to be. I mean, yeah, okay, I get it, but how long does it take? Like, if it takes longer than a month, how agile is DAU? How agile is the policymaker? They can't even keep up with Congress. Is that what you're saying? I find that sad.
Now, that is true. I mean, it takes years to adapt. Sometimes it'll go fast, sometimes not.
Well,
Well, then you end up with program managers who have to go get their job done by bypassing the rules because the rules can't and the policy can't catch up to where the country is going in the national security posture. Sorry, Jennifer, I cut you off again. Apologies.
well, that's okay. I'm very good at cutting other people off, so I apologize in general for all the cutting off I do. But no, what I was going to say is I sat in senior level meetings and of contracting personnel where they said, oh, let's just turn all these contracts into other transactions because then we'll, get all of our deadlines done. And so these weren't program people, these were contracting people, and they were basically looking to run through the other transaction door to circumvent traditional contracting rules because it would be less work for them, it would be much faster, and to me that's where it gets very problematic is, when you have enough people doing that, then that's really what it is being used for. It's not being used to get to cutting edge technology. I mean, like when you're talking about taking existing contracts and turning the follow on to that contract into an other transaction, is that really getting at cutting edge technology? No. I mean, it's basically just trying to, get out of your contracting hole and into this sexy world of other transactions. And to me,
Are you
that's
saying are
problematic.
you
Pardon?
are you saying I can't award an OT for personal services?
Oh, I'm sure it happens all the time. That's probably what these consortiums are, actually, is, anyway.
All right, last words. Nick, you want to go first?
I'll go first. I'll just go repeat myself. The issue here is the consortia. Um, I'm very concerned by the consortia, as I've said all along in this hour. I feel like the value added by the consortium management organization isn't apparent, and it may actually be counterproductive and actually inhibit competition. And I would seriously think about reforming the use of OT consortia. That's where I would focus if somebody wanted to hear my opinion.
I think my last word is that, and I go back to the tracking. We need to have there needs to be more transparency here. We need to know how much this is being used and what it's being used for. Um, and I think that there is an absolute need for the fluidity of other transactions when it's appropriate. But when you use other transactions to just try and, cut to the chase or, get something done a lot faster and easier on the contracting side, then you're just going to end up closing this door permanently for everybody else, which is not good. And so that's what I would stay with is, like just use it the way it's supposed to be used for the situations it's supposed to be used, and people will be singing your praises for the fantastic results of, cutting edge technology in a timely fashion instead of just, pointing out that, all the flaws in your process. because, have we seen great results from these other transactions? There's no like, oh, we came up with this great technology in 2 months or whatever. I mean, we're not seeing results any better than what we see through contracts. And in my mind, I mean, in general, but in my mind, that's largely because we're just using it the same way we use contracts, which is what's going to end up closing this door for everybody permanently.
Well, I guess my last word is we're going to get a new set of rules on OTs. I think that that's the response that was given in the IG report. And I hope when they're thinking through these rules, they're not thinking that what's in the FAR is the ideal. I think I would like to see them come up with rules that make sense in this environment, that provide the transparency, that provide some level of competition, but don't look to the FAR as the model. That's all I'm hoping.
To that point, if they come up with new rules for using these things, are they going to go out for public comment?
Well, that's a good question. This wouldn't be, well, let me think about that. The rules that, or the law that requires publication of the FAR is the OFPP Act. And I don't know if this is procurement within that, this is considered procurement. So
I don't know either.
I don't know what rules would apply. There are rules out there for OTs, but I don't know if they're in the Code of Federal Regulations.
Well, I think DPAP would be open, or not DPAP, DPC would be open to comments on it. I mean, so basically they're going to take their existing other transaction guide, which is available, publicly available on their website, and revise it. Will they post the draft for comment from the public? Possibly, but I don't know that they do that now.
All right. Do we have any questions from our audience? Anyone? Let me enable your microphones. Or you can put something in the chat.
Function, right? We're not.
All right. Looks like we're not getting any questions from our audience. So let me go ahead and wrap it up. I'd like to thank Jennifer and Nick for their participation. Thank our audience members. And we will see you again in 2 weeks.